Hello everyone, Prime here, and I hope you've had a great day, because today we're going to be covering the most unlucky gods and goddesses, mostly outside of Smite, but some are also from Smite as well, and we're going to be starting off with the son of Hermes and Aphrodite, Hermaphroditus. Hermaphroditus was approached by a nymph, Salmacis, and she fell in love with Hermaphrodite hopelessly. She approached Hermaphrodite and, if they could chill, hang out, and, go on dates and all that lovey couple stuff, Hermaphrodite wasn't interested. So she ended up having to wait until he disrobed and wanted to take a bath in a lake, and she snuck up on him and grabbed hold of his arm. And you're thinking, how does that fix anything? Well, she begged the gods for them to never be separated again, and she got her wish, but in the most sick, cruel, and heartless way you could possibly imagine. You see, when they left this lake, their two bodies were merged. A bit like in Dragon Ball Z, when they do that little dance thing, or put on a certain ring, and those bodies combine, and then they're two people, but also one person at the same time. Like that! You know the word hermaphrodite? Well, you can pretty much imagine what happened here. Hermaphroditus actually became a hermaphrodite. Probably the origin of the words, but I didn't actually look that up, but probably is the origin of the word. At least it seems like a decent enough story behind the word. Next up we have Anya, the goddess of love and fertility that may have been a fairy queen as well. She was a protector of women and essentially just the best goddess ever if you were a woman. Some say that she was actually the Morrigan, but again, that's something that some say, others don't, so there you go. Now, Anya had a special stone that had the power to rob men of their wits and intelligence if they sat on it. If they were silly enough to sit on it 3 times, then they could permanently lose their wits. So, yeah, stay away from her stones. Now, as for the other part of the reason why I mentioned her being unlucky, see, she had an unfortunate history of being taken advantage of by men. And when I say taken advantage of, I mean forcefully. Every single time that this happened, she usually got revenge on the men. One time where this actually resulted in the birth of her son, the man that was the father was killed by her, or seriously injured by her. So she wasn't a weak goddess by any means. The other time that this happened, it was a king. In Celtic mythology, or just the Celtic belief system, as a king, you were required to have 100% of your body intact. You couldn't be losing a finger, an arm, anything. Fingernails were probably an exception, but other than that, you couldn't really be losing anything else. I'm assuming you could also cut your hair every now and then, but probably not. Don't quote me on that. Point is, if you had something like a nose missing, which I don't know how you'd live without a nose, you probably wouldn't be a king for very long. And after taking advantage of Anya, this specific king lost his kingly status because Anya chewed his ear off. So yes, don't mess with Anya. There's a reason why she's the protector of women. Going over to Greek mythology again, we have the eldest son of a titan who lived amongst men. This titan's son was always thinking to the future, whilst his brother, Prometheus, was always thinking to the past, and could even think back several hundred years into the past, whereas Prometheus himself was always thinking to the future. Because he was always thinking to the future, he found sympathies with man and took pity on them a lot. At this time, man was suffering greatly. Man living in a cold, barren world where they couldn't heat their foods properly. So they were surviving, but just surviving, not really living. Prometheus wanted to change this, and he came before Zeus. He begged them to bestow man with fire, but Zeus refused for a couple of reasons. The first being that Zeus didn't want man to eventually perhaps become intelligent and powerful, and eventually because he gave them fire, he didn't want them to use that gift to then overthrow him. So that was his first fear. In a variation of this myth comes the second reason why he didn't want to give them fire, and that's because Prometheus tricked Zeus at Mycenae by offering him a choice between beef hidden inside of an ox stomach or bones wrapped in shimmering fat. Zeus chose the bones wrapped in shimmering fat, and because of this set a precedent for man that they were allowed to sacrifice. So they would eat the meat off of the animals that they'd find and hunt, and offer the animals' bones to the gods. Zeus sort of feared what man could do with these newfound gifts, and took fire from them. Because Zeus prohibited the giving of fire to man, Prometheus discovered a stalk of fennel, and the insides of this item could be used to start a slow-burning fire. He then snuck into Zeus's abode and took a spark from one of Zeus's lightning bolts. With the spark, he was able to set off a fire. He then set off a fire on Earth for the humans, and they had fire. But Zeus eventually noticed this and was none too pleased, and fairly quickly deduced that it was in fact Prometheus who gave the humans the ability to create fire, and he had to be punished. He was chained on the side of a mountain to a rock, a boulder, something along those lines, and kept there. And in most variations of the story, that's not the end. An eagle flies down and picks at his innards, his very insides, every day, but the sad part is that he's an immortal. So he would regenerate every day. So this was a continuous torment. And of course, he's always thinking to the future, so he's always thinking of the next time that the bird would come and peck at his insides, all because he gave man the gift of fire. But he wasn't bitter towards man and didn't resent them for this. In fact, that was one of the bright sides he saw. At least man was somewhat pleased. So yeah, that sucks for him. Don't know how many people would actually do that for man, but I'm guessing not many. Next up we have Bran Fendigade or Bran Fendihide. I'm not too sure which pronunciation this is, couldn't really find a concrete version of the pronunciation, so there you go. He was the son of a sea god, Lear. One day he heard the most enchanting song by a goddess whose name he wasn't too sure of, but she told him of this island full of women where she could be found. So without wasting too much time, when he was ready, Bran set off and he took some of his brothers and 27 warriors out to sea. They found all sorts of things, they even encountered the sea god as well, but eventually they end up on this island and Bran falls in love with this goddess whose song he heard and stays on the island for about a year. But he was homesick after that time and wanted to go back, but the goddess warns Bran that if he leaves the island and sets foot back onto the island of normal man, he'll turn to dust. He didn't really believe this and kind of sets off and goes home anyway, and one of his traveling companions, they set on this land first and they begin to turn to dust. Apparently, they had been living out of the world of humans for a very long time, so that's why they'd instantly turn to dust, because that's what essentially they would have been, apparently. So, Bran and his crew were forced to sail the seas for essentially eternity, or a very long time. But in some variations of the story, Bran does indeed end up back onto the land of man, but soon after that he dies somehow, and his sister, Branwen, the goddess of beauty, has a broken heart, and she dies of a broken heart after hearing of her brother's death. Jumping into some Roman mythology, we have Terra and her lover Uranus. I'm going to interchange some Greek names, but as the mythologies are so similar, it shouldn't matter too much. They were making babies until Uranus had enough children, he decided, and wanted the excess of Titans to be sealed away inside of Terra. Terra didn't like this and she wasn't a fan, so she had one of her children, Cronus, cut off his genitals with a scythe. Cronus was in power, and Cronus wasn't necessarily a bad person. For humans, he was loved because he ushered in a golden age where people were happy and he was in rule, in power. Pretty great, right? Except for the fact that he heard of a prophecy and started eating his own children. Terra didn't like this too much, so sided with Zeus and had Cronus overthrown. I suppose it would be Saturn if we're going with Roman mythology, but you get the point. Cronus is overthrown, and would you guess what happens to Terra? She has her titanly children sealed away yet again for rebelling against the gods inside of her once more. Terra is the earth itself. The children were sealed away in Tartarus. Tartarus exists just beneath the earth. Terra, not being happy about this, starts up another rebellion against the gods, and this fails yet again, and she has to live with the thoughts of her failure, whilst essentially being used by humans and the gods and watching their lives and how happy they are. Pretty sucky for Terra, if you ask me, but pretty unlucky goddess. Jumping into some Norse mythology, we have Sarimnir. He was a divine boar of the gods, and every day after the gods were doing their day-to-day lives and all of that, the boar was butchered and cooked by the chef of the gods. Now, the unlucky thing for this boar is the fact that it was revived every day just to be cooked again, near enough the end of the day to be eaten. I'm not part of any animal rights group, not a vegetarian, or what's the other thing, vegan? But that's still pretty sad for the boar. Being immortal just for your purpose being divine, endless supply of food, not very nice. But moving on to an even more unlucky person from Norse mythology, we have Honea. You see, after the Aesir-Vanir tribe war, the gods exchanged hostages to maintain a lasting peace. Honea and Mimir were given from the Aesir god tribe to the Vanir god tribe, and of course they went to live in Vanaheim. Honea was a bit of lacking a couple of brain cells, but put in a leading position of the Vanir tribe as a sign of respect and, to help the peace. Unfortunately, Honea required a lot of help from Mimir to make pretty much every decision the Vanirs would come to him for. Literally anything Honea was supposed to help in terms of leading the Vanir tribe, Honea would just refer to Mimir, and Mimir would tell him what to do. Unfortunately, though, Mimir had duties and things that he wanted to accomplish. He leaves the Vanir tribe to go after these pursuits, and Honea is left alone to lead the Vanir. It was a recipe for disaster because after a while, Honea eventually kept on telling the Vanir people to let the others decide, and wasn't ruling at all. The Vanir pick up on this and feel a bit slighted. So they go over to Mimir, say hello, ask how he's doing, then cut off his head. Sad story for Mimir. Honea is proven to be an idiot. Very sad all around, and very unlucky that the gods decided to pick Honea. They could have picked literally anyone else. Anyone else. Loki would have been fun, but no, they picked Honea. So that's that. Now jumping into some Japanese mythology, we have Tsukuyomi, the brother of Amaterasu and Susanoo and the god of the moon. He once descended to the earth because Amaterasu asked him to do so, and visited Ukomochi no Kami, the goddess who possesses food. Essentially the goddess of food. She welcomed Tsukuyomi and turned to the earth. She then began to vomit a bunch of game into the wilderness, so, different animals to be hunted. She vomited fish into the sea. Tsukuyomi, she boiled a bunch of boiled rice. She then prepared him a meal of essentially her vomit, but she's a goddess, so it's food. Tsukuyomi didn't care though, it was vomit, so he was displeased, drew his sword, did a bit of a cutting motion, maybe a bit like Genji from Overwatch, but an actual play of the game with one kill. Point is, when he returns to Amaterasu, she is not pleased, because everyone likes food, and he kind of just killed it. Henceforth, I shall not meet you face to face, she said. And that's why the moon and the sun are separated, according to Japanese mythology. Fairly unlucky that she decided to send Tsukuyomi over Susanoo. Though in some variations of the story, it is Susanoo that is sent down to Earth, but in most variations it's Tsukuyomi, so she probably should have picked Susanoo. Now we have Hawaiian mythology. There are some other names for the mythology, but we're just going to call it Hawaiian mythology to keep it nice and simple for me. Hine Nui Teipo, Great Woman of the Night, was the daughter of Tane, one of the first beings of existence. He used some red clay to construct a wife for himself, and with that wife, he then had a daughter, Hine. Then he kind of sort of has a child with Hine without telling Hine that they're father and daughter. And when she finds out, she's incredibly embarrassed and decides to flee to the underworld in shame. But Tane goes down to the underworld and explains that they have children to raise up on the surface. So she kind of does that for a bit, but eventually does return to the underworld. What this does is that because their children are in fact people lose their immortality. And because, you and I, we're not immortal, right? So to reclaim this lost mortality, a demigod, Maui, decides to go down to the underworld and essentially has to kill Hine. But he's instructed to do so in a very specific way. He has to enter her and leave her through her mouth. And I'm pretty sure you're aware that there aren't many entry points on a human being. So he's forced to enter through her lower front entrance, shall we say. And he brings along some bird companions who he essentially asks not to laugh at the fact that he's entering through that very specific place because it would look kind of funny, and he begged them not to laugh at him, but said that he could laugh as much as they want after he was out of her mouth. But the birds couldn't do it. They either see a worm's tail wiggling around at one of her entrances, or they see two legs kicking about at the front of her entrances, and they just burst out laughing. But the goddess wakes up, of course, because birds are laughing, and shuts her legs. Why she was even sleeping in such a position, I don't know. Plot points, I guess. But she shuts her legs, and Maui is slain. Very, very, very unlucky for Maui. That's almost the most unlucky god I have here. But not quite. I have one more story, and this one is from Native American or Indian mythology, if you prefer. And the old man is a bit of a dick, kind of a trickster, and one day he finds some squirrels playing a game that includes some burning coal, or a burning substance that they sort of cover themselves in, and see how long they can withstand the burning substance before they have to throw it off of themselves. So the old man wants to play as well, and the squirrels agree, but only because the man says that he'd cover himself in the stuff before throwing it off. Unfortunately for the squirrels, the man watches them play, and then doesn't remove the stones from them, so they are cooked. He eats as many squirrels as he can for that day, but he can't finish all of those squirrels, so he saves them for breakfast, and asks his good friend, the orifice located somewhere on his body, to keep watch and alert him when a threat would come along. Every time a certain threat did come along, his good lower friend would alert him with a noise. The noise isn't exactly specific. It could have been a smelly noise, it could have been a rumbling noise, it's not too specific. Eventually, a lynx comes along, and the old man's so enjoying his sleep that he just doesn't want to wake up for any noise at all, and ignores the warnings of his little, opening. Because of this, the lynx eats up the rest of the squirrels and goes about its day. But the old man was very disappointed in his little, good pal down there, and decided to hunt down the lynx. At first he tries to rip the lynx apart, doesn't work, but he gets rocks, smashes it into the lynx's head, and the lynx dies, but that's also apparently the reason why lynx have sort of flat heads, or flat areas on their heads. But he also has to punish his good friend for not waking him up with fire. And the old man didn't quite realize, or forgot to realize, because he's quite a special man, that he and his good friend were linked, as technically they do share the same body after all. So he was in a lot of pain. So what he does is he reaches the top of a hill and decides to show his friend to the world. Then he sits in a certain position where the wind can best captivate his friend, and hopes that the winds will soothe his pains, but they don't. So he asks for stronger and summons stronger and stronger winds, and eventually he's carried away and flies into a tree. He then is enraged by this tree that would dare assault him, and pulls out a knife on it, then begins to stab it a bit and assault it, and just be generally horrible to the wildlife. Well, the tree specifically, I suppose. So yes, don't mess with this old man, because he's quite, I'm not going to call him crazy, but interesting. He's quite interesting, shall we say. Yes. But those were the most unlucky gods that I could come up with. At first, I was going to do this for the gods in Smite, and then I figured I've been doing quite a lot of gods outside of Smite, so why didn't I continue that trend? But I hope that you did enjoy it anyway, and if you did, go ahead and leave a like. If you're new to the channel, want to see more videos like this, well, you only need to subscribe. If you want to see content very similar to this right now, though, I suggest that you either go and find a video I did covering the 5 funniest myths in Smite, or new gods that we need in Smite. But until the next video, have a very good day. I have been Prime, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.